fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers. Today, we're in the coaches booth, and we're talking coaches, and Clint Hurrt specifically had a real nice sit-down interview with the Wyman and Bob show on 710 ESPN radio in Seattle. And we thought we'd kind of go through the transcript a little bit of that show because there were a lot of tidbits in there and really big chunks of information that kind of give us clues and hints, even more than that, just directly what is going to happen, what's going on, and trying to marry that up with scheme and kind of gauge your excitement, Keith, about that and possible player fits moving forward. Should be a great show. Welcome in.
Yeah, so I'm excited about this. Clint Hurtt's both his press conference and, that interview that you're talking about was like music to my ears. It was exactly what I wanted to hear. I didn't want, I was worried that I was going to hear, talk about, we know what we do and it's about doing it right and doing it better and whatever. And that's what I was expecting. That's not what we got. What we got was, we know we need to change. We know we need to evolve, and we're going to do that. And we're going to be aggressive in doing that. And it's exactly what this team needs. It's exactly what this team needs. And you pair that with the fact that you've got three guys that are in charge of figuring this out and running it that are all young and incredibly smart. It's just fantastic.
That is the biggest takeaway. I mean, we've kind of been looking at this now for at least a week. We talked about it a little bit, covered it on our mock draft show last week. And this week we kind of decided to devote a whole show to breaking this down a little bit because there's just a lot there. But the big takeaway for me, and I think for you, is the idea that he talked about autonomy. Directly from Pete Carroll to go and put this thing in his way. And you're right, just the intelligence, the overall intelligence of these guys, young, all mid-40s or younger. And it's, I think it's just, for me, I think it points back to the idea that I always knew in my head, but it just took a while. It took a year longer. And I think it took a year longer to kind of do the offensive coordinator thing too. But we talked about Pete Carroll moving on and being able to be adaptable. And I always thought that he was. And there's just a lot of impatience, in the fan base, and rightly so. Everyone wants to win. But when it comes to Pete, everyone thinks of him as being this staunch leader who's set in his ways, and he's just got one way or the highway, and he gets overly involved with things. I just don't get that. I've never got that. I've never got that feel from Pete himself or his actions. I always thought he was adaptable, sometimes not as reactive per se as some would want him to be, but I think he could be better, for example, in like in-game decisions and adaption at half times and so forth. But overall, I'm not displeased with that. But on this thing, I think it really does show that he's seeing what we're seeing. He's not happy with what we've seen with the defense, and he's gone out and made the changes that everyone said that he should make, including bringing outside voices in that are not involved at all with the organization or with other coaching trees that these guys have had as well, in Karl Scott, for example.
Yeah, I was saying, let's start with that because here's the quote. It said, "Let me start off with Karl because it was really a fresh meeting." And of course, that's when the thing closes. Because there was no prior relationship with him. With Karl, Pete Carroll asked me, let's go get some fresh names. Let's go some new ideas for defensive back coaches. Who's out there? Like that right there, like just they didn't know him. They started calling around and trying to, hey, give me some names. Who do you hear about? Who do you like coming up? That kind of stuff. And a whole bunch of people kept bringing up his name. So they go, okay, let's call him. Let's see if we can get a hold of him and hear what he has to say. And they ended up it went awesome, and they hired him. But this is Pete Carroll saying, let's go get new guys. I don't want people that I'm associated with. I don't want people who know what I do. I want fresh eyes, smart guys who are going to come in and evolve what we do, make it different. And
this is coming from one of the best defensive backs coaches in NFL history, really.
Yeah. I mean, he really is. I mean, Pete Carroll, you go to from his time as a defensive coordinator to his time as defensive backs coach to the first few years here. I mean, the guy can teach defensive backs. He knows what he's doing. But he's looking for new ideas, new ways to improve what he does. But also what really it comes down to scheme things, because he's noticing, hey, our scheme is stale. Let's go change it. Let's get ideas in here that are different.
Yeah.
Different ways.
These elite quarterbacks around the league are beating us.
Yeah.
We got to find a way.
Yeah. And I just find that to be that part to be what much against what most people's opinion of Pete Carroll is.
What do you think of Coach Karl Scott as a coach? What does he bring to this table?
Well, what he brings is the ability to teach defensive backs.
So what's his background?
Well, his background is Alabama, where
Nick Saban.
Yeah. So he's from that coaching tree. He spent some time I think it was Minnesota and with the Vikings and stuff. So it's not like he's just a college guy, but he's from that Nick Saban background. And, I mean, and those defensive backs are usually well coached up, but if you look at what they do, they're very physical. They're at the line of scrimmage. They they jam receivers. They don't let them get into their route quickly. There's a lot of stuff that seems pretty common from what they do. And it's like, okay, this is kind of what the Seahawks used to do and they've gotten away from. But they also don't run cover 3. They mix up stuff all over the place. They run man, they run zone, they run cover 2, they run cover 3, they run just a whole bunch of everything, and they disguise it well, and they do a lot of those things. And so you got a guy who can teach defensive backs and really knows coverages and schemes.
Yes.
and that part. So it's just a really interesting hire, especially as a guy who communicates really well, teaches really well.
Yes.
And they need that. This is something that they lost with Chris Richard and they've never really replaced.
Yeah. Clint Hurrt called him a savant. And I went out and watched an Alabama video, coaching seminar video that Karl Scott put on for other college and high school coaches from around wherever. And it blew me away. I mean, the guy's A, full of energy, and B, knows his stuff. I mean, he is a deep guy with a deep knowledge of a lot of different schemes and a lot of different packages and how to communicate those with players in language that they understand. It was over my head, Keith. I tried really hard to keep up with this guy and hang in that room with him on YouTube. I suggest folks go up and check that out if they want to search that. The other thing that I found interesting as Clint Hurtt continued to talk about Karl Scott and Desai being on the roster was that they were going to immediately start going to work. And the first thing that they were going to do is sit down and watch film of their own players. And I'm talking Seahawks players, and basically evaluate the roster. So they were going to sit down and evaluate the roster, not only in the secondary, but all levels of the defense. And Clint wanted their outside perspectives to go through everybody, basically grading them before we hit free agency and the draft. I thought that was spot on, pretty amazing. And then
it was more than just grading them. It was more than just, hey, is this guy good or not? It was, hey, how can we use this guy's skill set?
Or does he fit?
Or how can we make them fit? Not like shoehorning them in, but if we design what we do around what they do well. What does that look like? And can we put those pieces together into something that will work really well? And if they don't fit together well because they're just too disparate, then okay, maybe we need to find some different players. But it was more than just, hey, how good are they? It was like, what do they really do well, and how can we use that trait?
Yes.
That's what I got out of it.
Here's a quote. It says, "You just want to get a different perspective when you do that before you go into free agency and things of that nature. Then a lot of it for the rest of it is getting us on the same page terminology wise." So he also talked about they're putting in an entire new defense. So this isn't like Pete Carroll's defense. And I want to just make that clear throughout this entire interview thing and the press conference. It really became evident that this thing is almost from scratch. They're going to bring in elements. Obviously, Pete Carroll is still a teacher. He's going to have some input. Clint Hurtt's has his background. Karl Scott, obviously, to say they basically are. It looks like they're going to a 3-4 defense here, Keith, and with elements of 4-3 and so forth. But it seems like it's leaning heavier now on the 3-4 scheme.
That part I didn't catch. I didn't catch that it was switching more to a 3-4. I think you're going to see a lot of the fronts be very similar. Where we see, the Seahawks have ran most of last year from a bear front, which has basically the three defensive linemen kind of more centrally located, and the two outside guys.
Can I read you the quote? I'll just read you the quote. The 3-4 system is something that I've really embraced. Obviously, Vic Fangio being a big influence on that. Hurtt said. So with that being said, we are going to be some element of that. I would say we're going to be multiple. One thing that's going to be significantly different this year is we are going to be aggressive at all levels.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway,
they were way too passive. What I'm saying though is he's like, yeah, I'm really into that, but we're going to be multiple. That's the part that I took that as,
sure.
Hey, we know these principles, and we're going to use them, but that doesn't mean we're going to go a wholesale change and run a 3-4 instead of a 4-3 and line up with 4 linebackers. Especially when we've got a roster loaded with defensive ends that need to be up near the line of scrimmage.
Yes.
And so they're going to be multiple. They're going to be elements of both, and they may migrate towards a 3-4, but it's going to happen over a couple of seasons while they have a chance to sort the roster out. Just making this wholesale change from a 4-3 to a 3-4 with the roster as it's currently constructed, it would be a mess.
Yes, I agree with that. So let me talk to you about one of the key elements that I picked up out of this entire thing as well was the word aggressive. It came up over and over again. Mm-hmm. We have talked a lot, Keith, in this show over the years about the defense becoming passive and the type of players that they've brought in have not been as alpha, I think, as in the past. And we have not dictated terms to offenses. We've been playing a defense that has allowed teams to kind of operate and do whatever they want. And we haven't really been the aggressors. And it sounds like that's going to change.
Yeah, it is. And that was one of the things that you and I talked about over and over again, especially last season, when they're like, look, if you're going to be bad on defense, and the Seahawks were bad on defense, at least be bad aggressively and hopefully force mistakes and force turnovers instead of being bad passively where you just let teams walk down the field and score.
Yeah, that was weird.
And use up the entire clock doing it. I mean, they had 2 drives last year of 19 plays against them that went for touchdowns. They had the number of 10 play drives against them was the worst in the NFL. Time of possession, I think they were worst in the NFL. And it was, why are you being so passive? Go attack.
And Pete Carroll has never been that guy. That's what was so confounding to me. It was like, I don't get this. This is fundamentally not what this team is about.
Yeah.
So what do you see? Let me ask you this. What do you see? Are there players that we have on this defense that fit a more aggressive style? Or are we going to have to go out and remake this entire thing?
Oh, I mean, you can start with Jamal Adams. I mean, you got one of the best pass rushing safeties in the history of the game. Guy owns the NFL record for sacks as a defensive back in a season in which he played 12 games. And so you can start with that. You've got guys that can attack. How often did we see guys like Jordan Brooks blitz and come off the edge and do things like that?
He's got so much speed too. I can't believe they didn't take advantage of that.
Yeah, and then you go back and you look under previous defensive coordinators pre-Norton, they would do stuff where they would bring a cornerback off the edge, or they would mix in blitzes that were weird, and you had like looping blitzes where you'd get both KJ and Bobby both ending up coming from one side rather than straight up the middle. More exotic blitzes. Basically, there was a lot more stunts and twists and things on the defensive line. The Sixers didn't do any of that last season. It was really boring.
Well, and they finished 31st against the pass in 2021, 31st in 2020, 27th in 2019. That is not good.
No, and that's why it was at least 1 year too many with Ken Norton. Because the evidence was there that that was who he wanted to be. He wanted to be this team that had basically created this envelope and let the offense operate in front of it, and you come up and make the tackle. And if you're holding them to 5, 6, 7 yards per play, you need them to make a mistake, and then the drive ends.
Yes. And you know what? That's really basically the defense that the Legion of Boom ran, but we had so many, we had Hall of Fame level players on that defense. Well, and when you have super athletic and fast defenders, you can play that sort of bend but don't break thing, and you end up causing turnovers and so forth because you have playmakers and they make plays. The only guy that was seemingly a playmaker that could get turnovers on a regular basis in our defense was Diggs, and everything else was just kind of by chance.
And he was very much on the back end.
Totally, he was dependent upon mistakes. I mean, he was kind of he took advantage of mistakes, and he's really good at that. But the defense itself was so passive that nobody was given a chance to be a playmaker in this defense.
Yeah.
So do we even have playmakers? I mean, you mentioned Jamal Adams, maybe Taylor, obviously Brooks, but I'm not thinking of anybody on the defensive line, really. There's not a standout defensive end on the roster.
We don't know that because we've never seen them be given the opportunity. We know that you look at the pass rush win rate, especially when you pair that versus double teams, and you've got guys like Poona Ford, which is in the top 10 in the NFL, Daryl Taylor coming off the end, who was really successful. Dunlap coming off the other side, who barely played the first half of the year last year for reasons we still don't know. And
Robinson as well. His usage rate was lower than it probably
was really low, and he had a high pass rush. So you've got guys that can make plays, but they weren't being used. Instead, you had this defense running out, different players. I know that they were trying to run that bear front, so they wanted bigger guys. That's why they went and got Kerry Hyder, and Rasheem Green got so much playing time because they wanted the bigger guys up front in order to generate, stopping the run. Sure, fine, okay. They were great against the run, but they were terrible against the pass, and this is a passing league. You can't just sit back and let teams do that to you anymore. It just doesn't work. You've got to be aggressive.
I think, I think the defensive line needs to have, a little bit more aggressiveness, some packages to take advantage of some athleticism. I do agree, though, that the defending the run is still important, but
Sure.
you've also got to have good run support from your corners, from your safeties, and so forth, to take some of the pressure off of your defensive ends and so forth, just so that they're not completely. I mean, I don't know exactly what to expect from Karl Scott's defensive fronts in this new scheme, because are they going to be asked
Karl
to
Scott's not going to have any say
penetrate
on the defensive
quickly?
fronts.
Well, not Karl Scott, but Hurtt. Are they going to be asked to create burst and then hold a position, or are they going to be turned loose? Is my question, I guess, because there's two different philosophies in the way that you play, on the defensive front. You can either stand your ground or you can cause havoc.
True. Causing havoc leaves holes behind you if you don't get
Correct.
Get home. And so I think there's going to be a mixture of both, because that's what that's what good modern defenses do. Is you have to read what's going on, and if it's a running play, you have to hold your gap. And if it's not, just keep getting upfield, keep pushing. And so just within all of this, last year was so frustrating. Let's go back to the Super Bowl. It's the most recent game. And you saw the Bengals take Aaron Donald out of the game plan in the first half. He didn't really get a chance to do much. They double teamed him all the time. They ran away from him. They moved the pocket to make it hard on him. So what did the Rams do? They moved which side of the field Von Miller was rushing from. And they did different things in order to force the Rams to slide coverage so that they got one-on-one with Donald. And what happened? Honestly, he should have been the MVP, in my opinion.
I agree.
Not Cooper Kupp. But it was the schematic way of making life easy for your star, and it was doing so by being aggressive, right? By making sure you're bringing people, and doing so in a way that you can't pick up everyone that's coming in unless you single Donald, and it gave him a chance to be dominant. When was the last time we saw the Seahawks do anything like that?
Yeah. Well, no, right.
And the answer is Dan Quinn. We haven't seen them do anything like that. Any kind of scheming matchups on the defensive line since Dan Quinn was here. It's been a long time.
What does that say about Clint Hurrt being the defensive line coach for the last 3 years?
He has no say in any of that. He teaches.
Oh, come on.
Was he included in designing the scheme?
You would have to think, yeah.
No,
being a defensive line coach, he's just not going to be a parrot for.
He's there to teach
the defensive coordinator.
That's what. Who is it sitting in the defensive game planning meetings? It was your defensive coordinator, your defensive passing game coordinator. They didn't have
and all your position coach.
No,
the position coaches.
The position coaches aren't there for during game planning. They're given the game plan. There's meetings for that. They're given the game plan and said, here, this is what we're doing this week. Let's go teach it to the players. But they don't sit down for the hours on Monday and develop what the game plan is going to be. That's not who they're not part of that. That's why Desai held out for so long, was he wanted to make sure that he had a say in what was going to be implemented, that he had a voice in the game planning meetings, and that it wasn't just going to be Clint Hurtt's show, because that's not a given. So Clint Hurtt didn't have a say in any of that. He can go and be like, hey, we need to do more of this, but it's up to Ken Norton to listen.
Interesting. And you have to have the personnel.
Yeah, but they had personnel. They had a ton of defensive ends that were never
How many Pro
used
Bowlers did
properly.
we have on the defensive line, Keith? I'm talking about difference makers and personnel. We didn't have the personnel to like be good. I mean, we were good against defending the run. I'll give them that. But everything else was subpar on that defense. Everything.
Do you think that guys like Dunlap, especially given what he did over the last, 5 games, that
Yeah, but at this point in his career, Keith, he's just, he's a piece, but he's not like a wrecker.
Are you sure? Did you see him?
I'm pretty sure. I mean, he's a 9-sack-a-year guy. He's not a 15-sack guy.
Did you not see him wreck games over the last month of the season? When actually given an opportunity, and he wasn't even schemed in a way that allowed him to do anything. He had to just go beat guys.
Well, there's no question of the matter that he was fresh. I'll give him that much.
Yeah,
I don't know. To answer your question, I don't know. To answer your question, I don't know. I don't know if we have the players. You'd opened up this kind of little segment that we're working on right now with that statement. We don't know what we have, what we don't have. I think that is probably a true statement.
It is true.
We need to try to figure that out. And, that's what they're doing now is looking at all the film, kind of figuring that out, see if, when they put their scheme on top of those players, can they be successful? And for the most part, yeah. But this is a great opportunity when you take a look at the free agency list that the Seahawks have to get some guys in, to make a difference. And there's players out there in free agency that I think could help this team as well. And we'll see.
One of the other things that Clint Hurtt talked about wasn't just the being aggressive at all levels. It was being fast. He wants speed up and down this defense. Because that's how you attack. That's how you do those things. That's how you put a lot of pressure on offenses is you have to have speed. And they're going to go find guys that play with a lot of speed. And I think what that's going to show you is they're just going to be guys that leave because their skill set isn't built around their speed. And I think...
So are you talking about Bobby Wagner?
I'm talking about Bobby Wagner. The more that I think about it, the more that I go back and reread the quotes and all of that, I'm talking myself into this idea that Bobby Wagner is not going to be a Seahawk next year.
Well, did you see my text to you from last night or this morning or whenever I texted it to you? I was like, I think I'm going to be advocating for a trade or release of Bobby Wagner. And I typed that and I was like, it's so hard because I get it. I get it. It's like, it's one of those guys if he was playing for the Seahawks 30 years ago, he would have retired as a Seahawk. It's just the league has changed and evolved now to where you get to the point in a player's career, especially when they're making the kind of money that Bobby's making. It's hard for that same team to reconcile that number and the diminished return on the playing of that particular player. And that's where we're at with Bobby Wagner. He's got a $20 million cap hit. If he was cut, we'd save $17 million against the cap in 2022. $17 million is significant when you start out with 36. So you had, right? And so now you're up over $50 million just by releasing one player. That gives you an opportunity to reinvest into maybe 2 or 3 players or one superstar player at a higher position of need. And so that's where we're at. And how do we handle that?
One of the things that when you put that into perspective is if they were to move on from Bobby Wagner, that would give them the cap space necessary to sign an elite left tackle like Terran Armstead, who's sitting out there.
Or an elite defensive end like Von Miller or Emmanuel Ogbah. or a guy like Calais Campbell's out there, or Brandon Williams, Akeem Hicks, Malik Collins, Jaron Reed's still out there, Linville Joseph. Any of those guys would bring equal value, I think, to the team on that specific position group. My question is overarching. Would you rather have the $17 million in cap, or is taking Bobby Wagner out of the defense completely going to hurt your defense as much as adding back in like a Dante Fowler or a Justin Houston or a Von Miller or a Emmanuel Ogbah or something like that? It's just, where does that value proposition land? What do you think, Keith?
I think that the answer is
or left or offensive line, as you mentioned.
I think the answer there is it isn't 17 million or Bobby Wagner. It's, can you make it 8 million and Bobby Wagner?
I think 8 million is I think that message right there is like, hey Bobby, go find a team. Because I think you could massage a number where this year's cap hit could be around 10 to 12, and I think maybe you could have a conversation. I think when I said 8, I was thinking that would be
cap space earned. So his number would go from
okay. Gotcha.
So his instead of getting 17 million by cutting,
get him to 10 or whatever.
Get his cap number for this year down to 10 or 9, which you can do by adding a year or two and have a voidable year in there. And so it ends up going in a way where you get his cap number down and you keep him. And I think if you do that, you have to think about it. And I do think if they're going to go to more of a 3-4 look where you need 2 interior linebackers, you've got your super athletic speed guy in Brooks, and you've got your team leader, the guy who's going to make all your line calls and stuff right before the snap, in Bobby Wagner, and you let both of them go out there and be awesome. Yeah. I think you can do that. I think you can.
I honestly do think that the team is probably trying to figure that out. That would be the smartest move for them. But are you just doing Bobby a favor by keeping him on the roster like that? Or is your team better off now trying to move him? Maybe even for a 5th round pick or 3rd, possibly. But I don't think he's going to sniff like a 2nd round value or anything like that. I think now we're talking probably 3rd round to 5th round value if you could get him to renegotiate a deal with another team. Because nobody's going to take him for a $20 million cap hit this year. So
true, no one's going to take it. No one's going to take on.
Have to be a sign and trade or something like that.
For them, now they don't. There's no. They wouldn't.
Not a sign and trade, but you know what I mean. A team's going to have to renegotiate a deal with him.
Yeah, because it's not 20 million for the team that takes him on at 17, but they're still not going to take him on for 17. They're going to want to take him on for 10 to 12. But for them, it's going to be okay. We'll make this trade, but we're going to have pre-negotiated and a contract extension with him and his agent, so that when the trade is completed, he signs the extension and they get the player for under a contract that they like. Yes. It's not, they're not going to trade for him for a $17 million cap. It's just a lot for, yes, a 6-time All-Pro. But it's a 6-time All-Pro who just doesn't have the speed he used to. And I think that's one of the things that I don't know if you and I maybe are overselling a little bit how much of the decline is going on, because he was still 3rd in the NFL in tackles despite missing 2 games.
I think it really does come down to who's in front of him. And what I mean by that is defensive tackle. You've got to be able to take on some double teams on our defensive line and 2-gap and all that kind of stuff, and allow him to work in space. I think Bobby's great at that still. Sideline to sideline, he's still instinctively, I think he saves a step over some linebackers just because he's smart and diagnoses extremely well still. But as far as just physical ability, yeah, he's going to be a step or 2 slow at this point, but he still brings extreme value.
Mm-hmm. So I think you, when you're saying, maybe a 5th round pick, I'm like, then you keep him because he's worth more to your team. Remember, this is a guy that was he played two
Yeah, but
less games than
is
the
he
other
worth
people
more to
on the
your
list.
team? Is he worth more to your team, or is that money worth more to your team?
He is worth more to your team. If you can get him to drop his cap
If you
number.
can get him to drop, but if you can't, you've got to trade him or cut him. That's what I'm saying.
But you're not asking him to take a pay cut. You're giving him an extra year.
I know
an
it seems really
year.
it seems really easy to us, and the answer is of course, but to him it might be no. I don't want to do that.
You're not
I know, I
asking
get
him to
it.
take a pay cut. You're actually giving
I
him
know
more
that.
guaranteed money. He's not going to say no to more guaranteed money.
I would think.
So
that's usually the way it works, right? But I don't know. So what else? How about this? Before we leave Desai, did you figure out, based on everything that was said, a more defined role for him, like what the dailies are going to look like for him, what his role is going to be as far as being in Clint Hurtt's ear and all that kind of stuff?
Basically, what it looks like is he's going to take over a role similar to what Pete Carroll did when Ken Norton was there, and that's he's going to be a guy who has a say, but isn't the guy making the calls. So he's going to come in, he's going to point some stuff out, he's going to give a bunch of suggestions, but ultimately it comes down to Clint Hurtt.
It's almost like an extra coach. It's almost like it's a created position on the team where he can float between all the position group coaches and be the intermediary between Pete Carroll and Hurtt.
Yeah,
and he's just kind of the guy that floats around.
So, I mean, that's it. He's an associate head coach. That's what they created a title for him. He's going to be. He has a say in creating and implementing game plan, but he doesn't call the plays, and he doesn't have a position group. He's just a guy that is going to be there during at every level, right? He's going to be there for
and personnel possibly.
Yeah, I mean he's going to be there as an extra set of eyes at every level, from being a guy that's going to oversee Clint Hurtt all the way down to a guy that's you're going to see him out there working with defensive backs and Karl Scott. You're going to see him just being a guy at every level, very much like the way you see Pete Carroll do stuff, because he doesn't call any plays. He doesn't have any of those responsibilities. He's just there. And if you watch him during practice, he's in there with his hands, on players, showing them about, getting this shoulder turn or that hip and that kind of stuff. When he's working with defensive backs and when he's working with, linemen and that kind of stuff, he's mostly just yelling and screaming to get them pumped up. But he actually is there as a guy, floating, and you're going to see a lot of that from Desai.
On a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being outstanding home run, where are you at with this offseason and the coaching changes that we've seen, both on the offensive line situation and then on the defense?
I'd say a 7. I'm excited.
That sounds pretty conservative given what we've just talked about.
Well, here, I really like what they've done on the defensive side of the ball, where they've gone younger, fresh, new ideas, all of that. I still have that concern about too many cooks, right? Are there too many cooks in this kitchen? And does that become a problem?
Well, what do you mean by that specifically? Are you just talking about Desai when you say that out loud? Because really, he's the only guy that doesn't have a specific position group. Everything else is basically the same.
No, it has to do with the fact that you've got, with Norton, you had him and a defensive passing game coordinator and Pete Carroll. You had 3 different guys that had a voice in this. And now you've got Hurtt, Desai, Karl Scott, Pete Carroll. You've got multiple guys. And at some point, do you have too many decision makers? And if you have that many decision makers, do you have any decision makers? Who steps in and is control of things? And if it's not Clint Hurtt, then you've got somebody in charge that isn't the person making the calls on game day and if they're not confident in the plays they're calling, like they're going to be second guessing themselves. They're going to be second guessing what's going on because they don't believe in the scheme that was put together because someone else put it together. And I think that it can be a mess. Is it going to be that? I doubt it because Karl Scott's a young guy. He knows his role. He's coming in. Desai and Hurtt have worked together. Pete Carroll has given them, autonomy to do whatever. And then Clint Hurtt's like, well, yeah, of course I'm going to consult with Pete Carroll. He knows this stuff. He's really experienced. He knows his stuff. But he's like, but it's still my defense. And so just kind of having that.
Yeah, I mean, Clint Hurtt did say that he was going to lean on. He used that term, lean on Desai, because he's been there. He's in the same spot last year that I am in this year, as far as it was his first year calling plays for Chicago. This year it's my turn. So yeah, it does seem like a shared sort of a deal. I just don't know how it all works out. I'm sure those guys have had many conversations already about all of this, and it's all settled, and we'll figure it out. But yeah,
like I said, I'm worried about that, and I'm not convinced that the coaching changes on the offensive line and how that all worked out is going to equal better play, because Mike Solari is a very well-respected offensive line coach for a reason. The guy,
we just don't know a lot about Andy Dickerson yet. I mean,
we don't.
There's a lot of assumptions going on right now too. With everything, there just is. We don't know what Clint Hurtt's going to be like. We don't know what Karl Scott's really like as a coach. Does he rub people the wrong way or whatever? All of this really depends on the players rallying around these coaches and believing in this system and all of that. There's no reason to believe that they won't. In fact, you could argue that there's no way that they would promote Andy Dickerson unless that was absolutely true. He must have had a really good effect on that roster from where he was at last year, to be able to get that promotion after 1 year, I would think.
Yeah. And I do think it was it was also a scheme issue. That Solari's inside zone, focus and Waldron's outside zone focus clashed a little bit in terms of what Solari's good at teaching is not what the plays that Waldron wanted to call. And so they wanted someone who is going to be better at teaching the outside zone and those kind of that scheme specifically, and have it more be in line. And that's the reason why they brought Andy Dickerson over, was because he had that background. And so at that point, I mean,
was he the? I'm just not remembering correctly. Was he the offensive line coach for one season for the Rams as well before he came?
He wasn't. He was an assistant offensive line coach.
Okay, because I thought he had that in his background, but I couldn't quite remember.
So, but he was that, and maybe he was, and then he became the run game coordinator, which was how they gave him a promotion, which has allowed him out of his contract with the Rams and able to move over, because they can't hold him if it's a promotion. So
anyway, fun. Well, I think next time we should start. We've got a couple of things going on in Seahawks world. We've got the combine coming up in a couple of weeks, which is just a tremendous amount of fun. So we'll have all that to talk about. Although I understand there's this bubble that the NFL wants to create at the combine, and there's a whole bunch of players that are kind of saying, no, that doesn't make any sense to us. So hopefully that gets worked out. And then free agency is coming up in a couple of weeks after that. And so there's a lot of things going on in the next 4 weeks, and so it'll be a great time to start focusing on some different things with regards to players. So, all right, let's get out of here. Follow Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at NWC Hawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook. Find us on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube, and don't forget to subscribe. So until next time, go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.